So now we know how to identify it. We kind of know a little background on water chestnut. So now what do we actually do when it comes to removing it and managing it? It was mentioned earlier that there's a few different options for managing water chestnut. There's mechanical harvesting, there's chemical options for management, but what we're going to focus on today is the hand pulls, just us out there doing the dirty work pretty much. So the best time to schedule one of these removals by hand is late June to early August. Really the goal is to get them removed before the nuts and the seeds start dropping off of the rosettes into the water. At that point, when they're starting to kind of decompose at the end of the season, that's when it's going to kind of establish that new population for the next season. So we want to get to it before that point. So some things to keep in mind prior to your event, scouting out and pre-selecting sites. You can look on Google Maps and you can usually find where water chestnut is growing, but I wouldn't suggest just relying on Google Maps. I would suggest going out, scouting out that area, making sure there's accessibility, there's a safe launching area. If you go and scout it out and there's not a public access site, you're going to need to work on acquiring property permissions from an owner that's nearby that might have access to that area of the water. And then also making sure you have a place to dispose of the water chestnut. We're not just going to toss it on the shore and say we're done. If we get a heavy rain or any type of runoff and that runs back into the water, then our efforts were kind of pointless. So some common options are compost, if you can find a farmer that's maybe willing to take it, or what we've done a few times is send it to a landfill. Usually it'll stay contained there and there's no chance of it getting back into a water body. Some other things to consider while planning your management efforts is equipment that you will need for the pull. So most of the time you're going to need a personal watercraft like a canoe or a kayak, safety, a life vest, personal flotation devices. Some people might wear waders into shallow areas. For a little bit larger scale ones, I know we've used pontoon boats to get stuff in and out quicker. Make sure you have a first aid kit. These are sharp little nuts that you might be touching. I wouldn't want to get stuck with one. I haven't yet, luckily. And there are some different water bugs that might sting. So having work gloves as well is a good idea to protect your hands during the pull. Another thing to have is some type of container or something to hold the plants in the watercraft that you're using to transport yourself around. So some people use trash bags, baskets. I think I've heard of people using laundry bins, totes. We've seen, little ice fishing kind of pull behind things that you can attach to your kayak and just toss them in the back there. And then another useful thing is to have a scale. This is going to help you determine how much you actually removed for reporting at the end. And to keep in mind, water chestnut hand pulls usually last about 3 to 5 hours. It is tiring work, so I wouldn't be overly ambitious and try to schedule 8 full hours maybe of water chestnut removal. I mean, if you're up for it, go for it, but it does get tiring after a little while. So most people average about 3 to 5 hours for a water chestnut pull per day. But you can go to the next slide. And then just a little bit on how to actually remove the water chestnut once you've set up your management efforts, got your group of people together. One important thing is to move kind of slowly and gently while removing the water chestnut. Usually just kind of using a wiggling motion. So getting your hand underneath that rosette, getting as low into the water as you can without tipping your kayak. And then just kind of gently wiggling it will loosen it from the sediment, and that's going to give you the best results. You want to remove as much of the plant as you can. So you want to get that rosette. You want to get any of those nuts that are growing on the rosette. Try to get as much of the stem and roots out of that sediment. And if possible, if you're able to reach down there and wiggle it out enough, if you're able to get the seed right out of the sediment, that is the best. Some things to avoid is fast kind of movements, yanking on the rosettes if you're towards the end of the season and those seeds are about to drop off. If you're moving quickly, they're probably going to fall off quicker, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So moving in slow, gentle kind of motions is definitely the best. Leaving fragments of plants floating in the water, we're going to try to avoid. If somehow you ripped half of the rosette and you left the other half floating, there's a chance that there could still be a seed attached to that, and that could drop into the water eventually. And then also, you know, this is part of the moving slowly and gently, is trying to avoid disrupting and removing native plants. So if the infestation isn't too bad and there's just kind of some satellite populations around, you know, there might be some native plants growing. So moving slowly, trying to be selective of what you're pulling, not just yanking everything out that's growing around it, is also something to keep in mind. So that's all I have for water chestnut. You know, if you follow these steps and you're doing it all right, I think water chestnut removals can be a very relaxing, enjoyable task. I've heard some people calling it a Zen task. So enjoy your water chestnut removing.